So we were looking a little bit about quarterback power rankings or wide receiver power rankings, and one really can't live without the other. So we looked at, okay, what duo right now is the top in the SEC, right? Like what quarterback and wide receiver duo is making waves? And when we were breaking this out, we were looking at a couple things from a criteria standpoint. I think the biggest one was their connection, their stats, the consistency. And Randall, you brought up a good point, and it's like the game-winning plays or game-breaking plays. And I think that kind of separated a few for us. And pulling up the rankings here, I think you got to start at the top with who the top dog is, and that's Jaxson Dart and Trey Harris.
Yeah.
He's leading the SEC in receiving yards by a margin. So I think it's only right to have them at the top. And there's probably a couple people that though could have competed for that number one spot.
We look at the rankings here, not just having recency bias, but Taylor Green and Armstrong both had good games on Saturday. Taylor Green 5 touchdowns in the air. I think the recency bias kind of hurts Nussmeier and Lacey. Kyron Lacey from Thibodaux, Louisiana. He's having a really good season, and Nussmeier, he's every game he throws about a touchdown or two. He also throws a good amount of turnovers, but from a connection standpoint, it's undeniable that they are hands down the second best QB wide receiver combo in the SEC. Multiple games with multiple touchdowns, and so it was a toss up. But Trey Harris is in a league of his own.
Yeah. I think that those top three. I mean, people might be weird to see Taylor Green up there. There should be some other guys in that spot, but I think that those are the top three duos. Two that are interesting that we can talk about in tandem, and that's Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams, and then Peyton Thorne and Keandre Lambert-Smith. I think that they both need to be talked about in the same light because Williams and Lambert-Smith right now are leading the SEC in touchdowns at 7 apiece.
Yeah.
I think both people might look at Milroe and Thorne and like, these are two guys that aren't playing the best football from the quarterback position, but clearly they have a good connection with these receivers. Thorne's interceptions and the turnovers that he struggled with have him down a little bit.
Yeah.
But both of those, they have a good connection.
Definitely a good connection, right? And you see that connection in big plays. Keandre Lambert-Smith has had multiple, 30-plus yard receptions, a couple 30-plus yard touchdowns this season. We've seen it from Ryan Williams being able to stretch the field. Even the games that he doesn't necessarily score, we saw it, last week for Alabama having that, one of those big 30-yard passes against Missouri. Both have 7 touchdowns, I think, on the season, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Right. And so the difference is, of course, Alabama 6-2. They're playing winning football. Auburn is playing competitive football, not winning football right now. But Lambert-Smith is not an issue on their offense, and he would be a very valuable asset to a lot of teams in the SEC given his abilities.
Yeah, for sure. And these are the two guys from a wide receiver one standpoint, Williams and Lambert-Smith, that are kind of leading the wide receiver one yards per reception. They're guys that get open downfield, and I think that tells a story of what a receiver's connection is with his quarterback when they can air out those long balls. Elijah Badger, right, kind of there in that same conversation of a downfield threat.
Yep, definitely right there. And when we talk about Elijah Badger and Lagway, I think where they're kind of behind just on this list is the time playing together, right? I think Lagway's only played 1 or 2 starts since his second time going into the starting lineup, but Badger's been a really huge piece for their success. There's definitely a connection there, and both these guys are, under their sophomore year with Lagway being a freshman. So a lot of exciting football to come ahead for them.
Yeah. Back up to the top of the list, like Pavia and Van Buren and Coleman Jr. I think I had Pavia initially lower on the list, and you wanted him bumped up, and it's because of his impact on the team and where Vanderbilt would be without this duo, the transfer duo from New Mexico. Their time there definitely shows with their connection. And I'll call a little disclaimer that we know Stowers is technically a tight end. He's the leading receiver there. He's the guy who's making things happen. Like, he's pretty high up there on the receptions list for wide receivers and tight ends together. They've been playing winning football as a duo and kind of carrying the weight of the offense.
Definitely. And, something that stands out to me from the top 3 compared to the Pavia Stowers combination is the top 3 quarterbacks are also leading the SEC in attempted passes. Like, I mean, Nussmeier, I think, had 50 pass attempts last game. Armstrong or Green's routinely over 40. Pavia is probably throwing the ball about 15 to 22 times a game. It's an offense built more to run, but when he does need a big play, that's where Stowers comes in. In this era of transfer quarterbacks and transfer athletes, I think this should be a good story to tell of, maybe go to the same school with your receiver or with your tight end to continue that chemistry and just kind of that flow. And when we talked about the criteria, winning football to me trumps it, right? Lambert and Thorne would be a lot higher if they're winning games. Pavia and Stowers are making plays when it matters. We saw it against Bama. We saw it a little bit in the game against Texas this most recent week.
Yeah.
And so it's a strong combo. It's a combo that's put Vanderbilt clearly in that rank spot at the time, and now, of course, still receiving votes.
Yeah, definitely. And right below them, Ewers is not playing his best football of what he's capable to right now. And, Bond is one of his many targets. You mentioned a trio there from, adding the tight end there. They have 4 in the top 28 on receiving yards. So they have a bunch of guys kind of lower on the tier list. Not that stats are everything,
Right.
but the connection, the offense early in games, it doesn't feel like the connection is completely there. From a threatening duo, yeah, he's got 4 touchdowns. Like, I just think that they're in the upper half, but until the connection is stronger between them, that's kind of where they sit for me.
In a way, like in a isolated scenario, Van Buren and Coleman Jr. kind of scare me a little bit more, given their most recent performances in the last 2 games. I think Van Buren's had about 8 touchdowns the last 3 games. Like he only had 3 the most previous 2 games, and Coleman is just about scored every game this season. He had 100 receiving yards last week, and a lot of times they're playing from behind, but it's his game control and his abilities, right? He had like a 20-yard run or pass reception for a touchdown just from a regular, throw straight to the side, and he just takes it up the field. And that's kind of been Ewers' game, that like short pass to long touchdown. Something that you had talked to me a little bit before we talked about this episode.
Yeah, he's last in Power 4 quarterbacks on yards per attempt on depth of target. So he's not throwing the ball deep downfield and not connecting with his receivers in that manner. So yeah, and it's who can take the ball the distance. Coleman Jr. is really great at that. He's actually leading second in the SEC on reception. So he's getting those passes. He's 4th in yards.
Yeah.
People may be shocked, and we're going to get some hate for putting them as high as they are. But since Van Buren's come into the picture for them with a team that should not be winning games right now, he's at least keeping them in there with the offense that he's putting on display. So I'd say that the connection between them is what puts them at that spot.
Definitely. So, and before we kind of get to the second half of this rankings, when the season started, everyone was talking about Dart Harris, Cook, Burden. Burden was in that SEC receiver of the year. Ryan Williams was starting to build some hype as that up and coming freshman. Cole Coleman was in that discussion for Auburn. From the season starting to now, is there anybody on this list that surprises you where we placed them?
Yeah, I would say a surprising one for me would probably be Green Armstrong. Just at the beginning, because of thinking at how much I expected this offense to run. I knew that they were going to be shifting a little bit away from the Arkansas run team we'd seen in years past, but knowing Taylor Green's strengths, Quentin Jackson's strengths, Armstrong only has 1 touchdown on the year. But he's been a great critical piece to this team. From a shocking on the other side, I'd say it's, Beck and Smith right now of where we have them, and that might shock other people too.
Yeah, and Beck and Smith is definitely surprising. It was obviously overly discussed about what they were going to do at the wide receiver position. Smith has kind of emerged as one of the top guys. Lovett has been kind of vying to be that guy, but Smith has been the one leading the way, I believe, in yards. But there's more to be desired there with that connection.
Yeah, there is. And we talked about it a couple weeks ago, and the placing's changed, and I don't have that available. But, Arian Smith had 6 drops in 3 games from Carson Beck, and that lack of connection kind of hurt them. And that was part of that was the Alabama game. Right. So not having that clear target to go to that, is super consistent, like what Bowers was, like what McConkey was. It feels like Beck has made some ill-advised throws at times because of his receiving core and maybe not being the playmaking, guys that he was seeing in years past. Now, I think that they could be way higher on this list
Yeah.
down the stretch.
It's not even a feeling, Carson Beck right now he's second to first in the SEC when it comes to interceptions. Behind him is I want to say it's Nussmeier. So obviously he's completing passes, but a lot of times when he's not, they're for interceptions. He doesn't have the same type of weapons. But it's interesting because while he's 12th in our power rankings, I'm not saying that Carson Beck is not a better quarterback than Brock Vandagriff or Brady Cook. That's another discussion for another day. But as a team, Georgia is still top 10, right? So it doesn't fully necessarily correlate to the team success, how good the team is. It just does this duo threaten or scare defenses, right? I would say we're more scared of Milroe Williams compared to Beck Smith.
Yes.
I'm a little more concerned about Lagway Badger with what we've seen from Florida the last couple of weeks. The offense continued to improve. The defense showed a little bit better from that standpoint. 13 shouldn't come as a surprise either for, whether it's Tennessee fans or, college football watchers. I am a Ledet. I butcher his last name sometimes, but Nico, this connection is shown to make big plays when it mattered, right? We saw it a little bit in the Arkansas game, even though they lost. We saw it in the Alabama game, but it just hasn't been consistent. And so to be at the top, you got to be consistent. It's anything you do, football or this podcast. But that's kind of where the connection for Tennessee is it's bottom 4 in the conference.
Yeah, and I'd say that paints the picture for a lot of these ones at the end here, or middle to the end is the connection and consistency of finding the receiver. Nico's overthrown a ton of balls, missed target. Like he just doesn't seem like he's in rhythm. I'd say that's a similar thing from Cook and Burden. And like you mentioned with Beck and Smith, I think that Burden and Key's abilities is what puts them higher than the Beck-Smith duo. I do think that Beck is a better quarterback than Vandagriff and Brady Cook. So let that be known.
Yeah. And for Burden, he's getting double teamed a lot in these games as well. Like I talked about it earlier. Still, you still should find a way to get the ball to him. You got Theo Weath on the other side, so that should be your Chad Johnson to your TJ Hushmazada in some ways. But it has affected his production this year and their connection.
Yeah, right now Theo Weath's only 3 less receptions than Luther Burden, but more yards by about 30. So he's finding them in equal ways. Whereas you have this guy like Luther Burden, probably one of the best receivers in college football, and just not making full use of him. And it could be that. Safety help and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rounding this out here, there's a pretty good story to tell in all of these. Marcel Reed this past week, yeah, you could say he should be way higher on this list, but from a duo standpoint, he's a guy who's not expected to throw the ball often. He came in, only threw twice this past week. Noah Thomas, what this duo brings, I would say that from a QB wide receiver duo, they're not bringing a whole lot to the table, which is why they're last. They bring a lot in other ways. Same with Sellers and Bennett as well.
Yep. Yeah, the Sellers Bennett one. That's I think it's youth. It's in this age of college football, we're expecting quarterbacks to step in and automatically be good to go. It's not the case, right? Sellers is a first year starter. Arnold's a first year starter. Reed's a first year starter. He's in his game, like you said, is more dynamic on the ground. At number 13, we got a 5-star recruit. Started for Tennessee, so it's just a little bit different scenario when it comes to plug and play. But with Reed, they're still playing winning football. They're last in the power rankings, but they're first in the SEC. And I think a rational fan would agree with that from a quarterback perspective. Again, still rather have him than maybe someone from another team. I feel like I always pick on certain teams for quarterbacks I wouldn't want or do want, but he's ahead of a lot of people from a winning football perspective, but just from a pure passing, from what we've seen, not his abilities, need to see more.
Yeah. Yep. And last one here, Jaxson Arnold, Deion Burks. In another world, another life somewhere, they would be way higher on this list. The year just hasn't played out the way that Oklahoma wanted with injuries. I mean, Deion Burks hasn't been close to healthy this entire season. Missing games as well, and he's still their leading receiver aside from the tight end there getting some love, and it's been bad O-line play, quarterback mishap, switching out, putting Hawkins Jr. in there. Jaxson Arnold now coming back to the helm, which we're going to talk more in depth in the full episode here. But from availability is really why they're low. In a healthy world, O-line blocking, offense firing, and the defense doing what they've been doing, they would definitely be a higher duo, just availability and consistency.
Definitely. Which duo to you is the biggest threat, and which one's the biggest liability out of the championship contending teams?
I think it's almost dual threat where it's the same team for both answers. Like I think Nussmeier and Lacey are the biggest. Um, they are the biggest liability, knowing what Nussmeier can do, in throwing interceptions and, maybe not finding his guys in key games. Like we saw some struggles there against Texas A&M. But I think they're also the biggest threat because we have seen what they were able to do, like against Ole Miss, coming down the stretch of the game and Lacey getting some help from the other receivers there on that team. So I think that I have them kind of in that same bucket. Who do you have as the biggest threat and biggest liability?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest threats would be Arkansas. I think they have the ability to kind of play spoiler in some of these games in the upcoming season with versus Texas and their defense. Another strong offense that Texas's defense will have to face. The biggest liability, I would say, it would be Ewers and Bond. Just same story as Nussmeier, just the turnovers. He's had a turnover, I think, in about over 2/3 of his games this season. 5 over the last 3 weeks. And so that could be a liability, but with the weapons around him, he's able to overcome that, right? You can get Gunnar Helm involved. He's kind of your safety blanket. You can get Matthew Golden involved. He got his first touchdown since week 2 this season in the air. And obviously he's played a key role in the punt return game, but there's enough around Ewers to kind of overcome some of those setbacks. But against championship teams, we'll talk about it in the Texas segment as well. Like it could play a role in making these games closer for Texas than they might like them to be.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. It'll be interesting to see the trajectory of Texas, whether it's kind of the same from Ewers or if there's some improvement over the last stretch of games here that they need to get to the SEC championship. So that kind of wraps the power rankings. Anyone listening here, let us know what you think. If you think any of these are just way out of order, who are your top 3?
Yeah.
Who are your bottom 3? Let us know where we might have missed, and looking forward to hearing the response there.